The Stuka dive bomber. Terror from the sky. Imagine you're a Polish soldier in September 1939. The sky is bright and clear. Suddenly, you hear it. A sound unlike anything you've ever experienced. A rising, howling scream that turns your blood to ice. You look up and see them. Black shapes diving from the sky at impossible angles, nearly vertical, plummeting toward you like birds of prey. The scream grows louder, more terrifying. Your hands shake. Some men break and run. Others freeze in place. Then come the explosions. The Junkers U-87 Stuka has arrived, and warfare will never be the same. The Stuka wasn't just a bomber. It was a psychological weapon, designed to break men's minds before it broke their bodies. That infamous howling scream came from wind-powered sirens called Jericho trumpets, deliberately mounted on the aircraft's landing gear. They served no tactical purpose. They existed purely to terrify, and they worked beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The Stuka became the symbol of German blitzkrieg, of unstoppable power, of technological superiority. For 3 years, from 1939 to 1942, the Stuka dominated battlefields across Europe and North Africa. Then, everything changed. This is the story of the Junkers U-87 Stuka, the most feared dive bomber in history. It's a story of brilliant engineering combined with psychological warfare. It's a story of devastating success followed by tragic obsolescence. It's a story of the men who flew these machines into withering anti-aircraft fire, and the men on the ground who heard that scream and knew death was coming. The birth of dive bombing. Dive bombing wasn't a German invention. The concept emerged during World War I when pilots discovered that diving toward a target dramatically improved bombing accuracy. A bomber flying level at high altitude had to estimate wind speed, aircraft velocity, and trajectory, all while the target moved. Bombs often missed by hundreds of yards. But diving steeply toward the target eliminated most variables. Gravity and aircraft velocity aligned. The pilot aimed the entire aircraft like a gun. Accuracy improved tenfold. However, early aircraft couldn't handle the stress. Wings would rip off. Control surfaces would fail. Pilots would black out from the tremendous G-forces during the pullout. Aircraft would simply crash into the ground, unable to recover from the dive. Dive bombing remained a dangerous, unreliable tactic throughout World War I and the 1920s. Germany, forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles to develop military aircraft, conducted secret aviation research throughout the 1920s. German engineers working in Sweden, the Netherlands, and the Soviet Union experimented with dive bombing techniques. They studied stress factors. They tested reinforced airframes. They developed dive brakes, perforated flaps that deployed from the wings to slow the aircraft's descent and allow steeper diving angles without exceeding safe speeds. By the early 1930s, with Hitler in power and openly rearming, Germany was ready to build a purpose-designed dive bomber. Hermann Göring, commander of the new Luftwaffe, was obsessed with close air support for ground forces. He envisioned aircraft acting as flying artillery, delivering precise strikes on enemy positions immediately ahead of advancing German troops. The dive bomber would be the centerpiece of this doctrine. Hermann Pohlmann and the design process. The chief designer was Hermann Pohlmann, chief engineer at Junkers Aircraft Company. Pohlmann faced enormous challenges. The aircraft had to be strong enough to withstand repeated dives at steep angles. It had to carry a significant bomb load. It had to be accurate. It had to be stable during the dive and controllable during the pullout. It had to be simple enough for average pilots to fly safely, and critically for German military doctrine, it needed to operate from rough frontline airfields with minimal maintenance. Pohlmann's design was revolutionary. The U-87 featured an inverted gull-wing configuration, where the wings angled downward from the fuselage before angling back up toward the tips. This distinctive shape served multiple purposes. It allowed shorter, stronger landing gear, reducing weight and complexity. It provided excellent visibility for the pilot. and it created aerodynamic characteristics that made the aircraft naturally stable during dives.
The fuselage was constructed from a steel tube framework covered with duralumin panels. This provided tremendous strength while keeping weight manageable. The tail section featured a distinctive double vertical stabilizer, giving the aircraft its immediately recognizable silhouette. The fixed spatted landing gear, while creating more drag than retractable gear, was simpler, lighter, and more reliable, crucial for operations from primitive airfields. The dive brakes were the key innovation. Large perforated plates extended from the underside of the wings during the dive, creating massive drag. This allowed the Stuka to dive at extremely steep angles, sometimes approaching 90 degrees, while maintaining a controllable speed. Without dive brakes, the aircraft would accelerate to dangerous speeds, where control surfaces might fail or the airframe might break apart. With them, the pilot could maintain control throughout the dive. The bomb release mechanism was equally ingenious. The main bomb, typically 500 kilograms or 1,100 pounds, hung beneath the fuselage on a special trapeze-like mounting. During the dive, at a predetermined altitude, the pilot would release the bomb. The trapeze would swing the bomb outward and downward, ensuring it cleared the propeller arc. Split seconds later, the dive brakes would deploy, and the pilot would haul back on the control stick, beginning the pullout. The G-forces were tremendous, sometimes reaching 6 Gs, enough to cause tunnel vision or blackout. Pilots wore special compression suits to prevent blood from pooling in their legs. The aircraft carried a crew of 2, pilot and rear gunner. The rear gunner operated a flexible 7.92 mm machine gun to defend against fighters attacking from behind. The pilot controlled 2 forward-firing 7.92 mm machine guns mounted in the wings. These were primarily for strafing ground targets after the bomb run, though they could be used against aircraft in emergencies. The Jericho trumpets. The most infamous feature wasn't part of the original design. The Jericho trumpets, the wind-powered sirens that created the Stuka's terrifying scream, were added after early combat tests. Someone, accounts differ on exactly who, suggested that adding a psychological element to the dive bomber might enhance its effectiveness. Small propeller-driven sirens were mounted on the landing gear fairings. As the Stuka dove, airflow spun the propellers, which drove the sirens, creating a rising wail that increased in pitch as the dive steepened and speed increased. The sound was carefully engineered to be maximally disturbing to human psychology. It hit frequencies that triggered primal fear responses. Soldiers described it as a scream, a howl, the sound of demons. Unit cohesion would collapse as men scattered or froze. Some men went mad from repeated exposure. The psychological impact often exceeded the physical damage from the bombs. Positions would be abandoned before the Stukas even attacked. This was psychological warfare at its most effective. Spain, the testing ground. The Stuka's combat debut came in the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, where Germany sent military forces to support Francisco Franco's nationalists. The Condor Legion, the German expeditionary force, included several Ju-87 Stukas. Spain became a testing laboratory for German tactics and equipment. The results were spectacular. Against minimal opposition, with outdated anti-aircraft defenses and few enemy fighters, the Stukas destroyed Republican positions with devastating precision. A single Stuka could disable a fortification that might resist hours of artillery bombardment. Bridges, rail junctions, command posts all fell to the precision bombing. German officers watched and learned. The dive bomber worked even better than predicted. But there were warnings. When the Stukas encountered modern Soviet-supplied fighters like the Polikarpov I-16, they suffered losses. The Stuka was slow, with a maximum speed of only 240 miles per hour. It was unmaneuverable. Once fighters got close, the rear gunner's single machine gun provided inadequate defense. The lesson was clear. Stukas required fighter escort and air superiority. Unfortunately, this lesson would be forgotten in the euphoria of early victories. Poland. Blitzkrieg unleashed. September 1st, 1939. Germany invaded Poland. The Stuka units organized into specialized close support groups called STG, Sturzkampfgeschwader, flew mission after mission. They destroyed Polish airfields before the Polish Air Force could respond. They shattered troop concentrations. They demolished bridges, preventing Polish units from reinforcing threatened sectors. They attacked with terrifying precision, sometimes hitting targets within 50 meters of advancing German troops. Polish soldiers, equipped with World War I-era weapons and minimal anti-aircraft guns, were helpless. The psychological impact was overwhelming. Even veteran units broke and ran when the Stukas appeared. Command and control collapsed as headquarters were destroyed. Polish commanders couldn't coordinate defenses because Stukas demolished communication centers. The campaign lasted 36 days. Poland was crushed. The Stuka emerged with a legendary reputation. German newsreels showed the distinctive gull-winged aircraft diving through smoke and fire. Propaganda emphasized the Stuka as a symbol of German air power and modern warfare. The whole world watched and grew fearful.
France and the Low Countries. Unstoppable victory. May 1940. Germany launched Fall Gelb, the invasion of Western Europe. The Stuka units spearheaded the attack. At the Belgian fort of Eben-Emael, considered impregnable, Stukas provided close support for German paratroopers and glider infantry who captured the fortress in 24 hours, a position expected to hold for weeks. In France, Stukas operated as flying artillery for the panzer columns. Wherever French forces established defensive positions, Stukas appeared within hours and destroyed them. The Meuse River crossing at Sedan, the critical breakthrough that won the campaign, was secured by waves of Stuka attacks that suppressed French artillery and prevented counterattacks. British and French forces had more and better anti-aircraft guns in Poland, and the Stukas began suffering losses. But German fighter cover was overwhelming. Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters swept the skies clear. Stukas operated with near impunity. The psychological impact on Allied troops, already reeling from the speed of German advance, was catastrophic. The scream of the Stukas became synonymous with defeat. France fell in 6 weeks. Again, the Stuka dominated. Hans Ulrich Rudel, who would become the most decorated German soldier of the war, began his legendary career during this campaign. Rudel eventually flew over 2,500 combat missions, more than any other pilot in history, almost all in Stukas. His personal tally included a battleship, a cruiser, 70 landing craft, over 500 tanks, and hundreds of other vehicles. He was shot down 30 times and wounded 5 times, but always returned to combat. Rudel became the symbol of the Stuka pilot, fearless, skilled, and absolutely dedicated. The Battle of Britain, the turning point. August 1940. The Luftwaffe launched an air campaign to destroy the Royal Air Force as preparation for invading Britain. Stuka units attacked RAF airfields, radar stations, and coastal shipping. They expected another quick victory. Instead, they encountered a fully alerted, prepared enemy fighting over their homeland with modern fighters and integrated air defenses. The results were catastrophic. British Hurricanes and Spitfires tore into the slow-moving Stukas. RAF pilots discovered the Stuka's weaknesses. It couldn't outrun fighters, it couldn't outturn them. The rear gunner's single machine gun was nearly useless. Stukas began falling from the sky in alarming numbers. On August 18, 1940, a day called the hardest day by both sides, Stuka units suffered 25% losses in a single day. Entire squadrons were shot down. German High Command withdrew the Stukas from the battle. They were too vulnerable. The myth of invincibility shattered. The Stuka, so dominant in Poland and France where German fighters controlled the skies, proved helpless against determined fighter opposition. The aircraft hadn't changed, the circumstances had. The lesson from Spain that Stukas needed air superiority was relearned at terrible cost. The Eastern Front returned to dominance. June 1941. Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The Stuka returned to its element. The initial Soviet Air Force was destroyed on the ground or shot down in unequal combat. German fighters again controlled the skies. Stuka units rampaged across the Eastern Front, destroying Soviet armor, fortifications, and troop concentrations. The Eastern Front became the Stuka's primary battlefield for the rest of the war. Hans Ulrich Rudel and other aces achieved incredible scores. They developed specialized anti-tank tactics, carrying two 37mm cannons mounted under the wings and attacking Soviet tanks from behind where armor was thinnest. Soviet tankers learned to fear the Stuka as infantry had in 1939. The winter of 1941-42 was brutal. Stukas operated in sub-zero temperatures. Engines refused to start, oil froze. Pilots and gunners suffered frostbite. Yet the missions continued. Stukas provided close support for German troops desperately fighting off Soviet counteroffensives around Moscow. The aircraft proved remarkably resilient, operating from snow-covered fields with minimal maintenance. But Soviet defenses improved. Anti-aircraft guns multiplied. Soviet fighters became more numerous and better flown. By 1943, Stuka losses mounted steadily. The aircraft was obsolete, too slow and vulnerable for modern air combat. Yet Germany had nothing to replace it. Production continued because the Wehrmacht demanded close air support, and the Stuka was all they had. North Africa, desert warriors. In North Africa, Stukas operated in entirely different conditions. Sandstorms damaged engines, extreme heat caused mechanical failures. Yet, the Stukas adapted. They supported Rommel's Afrika Korps from 1941 to 43, attacking British positions, supply convoys, and armor. The desert provided excellent visibility, but also exposed the Stukas to long-range anti-aircraft fire. British Desert Air Force fighters hunted Stukas relentlessly. The RAF had learned the lessons of the Battle of Britain and applied them ruthlessly. Stuka units suffered heavy losses, but continued operating until the Afrika Korps finally surrendered in May 1943. Survivors were evacuated to Sicily, and then Italy, where the grinding Italian campaign continued.
The final years, obsolete but deadly. From 1943 to 1945, the Stuka was completely obsolete. Newer dive bombers like the Focke-Wulf F-190 fighter bomber performed the same mission with better survivability. Yet Stukas continued flying because Germany was desperate for any aircraft that could support ground troops. Losses were horrendous. Experienced pilots died. Replacements, hastily trained, died even faster. On the Eastern Front, Stukas continued attacking Soviet armor and positions. Soviet anti-aircraft fire was overwhelming by 1944. Soviet fighters dominated the skies. Yet small numbers of Stukas, flown by surviving aces and desperate novices, flew mission after impossible mission. By 1945, Stukas were flown until they were shot down, ran out of fuel, or mechanical breakdown made them unflyable. There were no spare parts, no replacement aircraft, just fly until you die. The last Stuka missions were flown in May 1945, days before Germany's surrender. The aircraft that had symbolized German military dominance in 1939 limped through the final missions of a lost war, obsolete, vulnerable, but still fighting. Legacy and historical significance. The UJ-87 Stuka represents both the peak of dive bombing and its obsolescence. Over 6,000 were built, more than any other dive bomber. In the early war, when conditions favored it, the Stuka was devastatingly effective. Its precision bombing and psychological impact contributed significantly to German victories. The aircraft proved that close air support could be decisive in modern warfare. But the Stuka also demonstrated the danger of designing aircraft for specific conditions. It required air superiority to survive. Against modern fighters and strong air defenses, it was helpless. By 1942, the concept of the specialized dive bomber was obsolete. Fighter bombers could perform the same mission while defending themselves. Every major air force abandoned dedicated dive bombers after the war. The Stuka's most lasting legacy is psychological. That scream, the Jericho trumpet wail, remains one of history's most recognized sounds. It appears in countless films and documentaries about World War II. It symbolizes terror from the sky, the helplessness of ground forces against air attack. The Stuka became a cultural icon representing Blitzkrieg, Nazi Germany's military power, and the terror of modern warfare. For the men who flew Stukas, it was simply their aircraft. They loved it for its stability, its strength, and its ability to absorb tremendous battle damage and still fly home. They hated its vulnerability,
its slew speed, and the certain knowledge that enemy fighters could kill them easily. They flew it anyway, mission after mission, because it was their duty and their comrades depended on them. The Stuka screamed across the skies of World War II for 6 years, and that scream still echoes in history.